It was 1982 when director Ridley Scott changed the landscape of science fiction cinema forever with the release of Blade Runner. Despite not setting the box office alight initially, the subsequent 35 years have seen both the film and the story of its production become the stuff of legend. I say all this just to give you an idea of how incredible it feels to be standing here in Budapest on the set of its sequel. Welcome to Blade Runner 2049.
Every civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce. But I can only make so many. Happy birthday.
The original Blade Runner is one of the most influential films ever put on celluloid, and it had a lasting effect on those involved in bringing its sequel to life.
At the time, there was no internet, and our only link with the cinema was through fanzine, you know, like Starlog and Fantastic Film. And I vividly remember the first time that I saw the first image of Blade Runner on the cover of one of those magazines. It was like something that was like a promise of a new way of approaching sci-fi.
I just had this feeling of it was bigger than myself and bigger than the world I lived in.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colony.
And that was kind of scary at the same time, because would this really happen when I grow older? Will I be in this kind of environment? Will that, it was kind of scary as a kid.
It's crazy to think that Ridley Scott in 1982, he put out on the table all these crazy ideas about humans and technology and, the future.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
While the idea of revisiting the Blade Runner universe at all is exciting, what makes Blade Runner 2049 even more thrilling is the fact that Harrison Ford returns in the role of Rick Deckard, which means the tantalizing prospect of finally getting some closure on that character's identity as a replicant, or, as some people will still argue, as not.
Lopa, Nehojma, te vaya Blade Runner. He say you Blade Runner.
Tell him I'm eating.
Let's talk about that original movie, because at that point you just come off the back of Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So what was it about Blade Runner that made you go, this is going to be my next movie?
Well, a lot of it had to do with Ridley, whose work I admired. And there was a different kind of character and a different genre. Although you might say that Star Wars and Blade Runner are both science fiction, they're very different kinds of science fiction. So, no, I was delighted to have the opportunity.
This sector's closed to ground traffic. What are you doing here?
I'm working. What are you doing?
Arresting you. That's what I'm doing.
I'm Deckard, Blade Runner, 260-354. I'm filed and monitored.
If you could give us one memory of what it was like making that movie, if you had to sort of distill it down to sort of the one overriding memory today of what it was like making Blade Runner, what is that memory?
Well, it's dark, it's night, it's raining. But besides all that, I enjoyed a lot of it.
Christ, Deckard, you look almost as bad as that skin job you left on the sidewalk.
I'm going home.
Could learn from this guy, guy. He's a goddamn one-man slaughterhouse, that's what he is.
Some really interesting actors to work with. Ridley was a lot of fun. We worked hard. It was gratifying.
I need you, Dex. This is a bad one. The worst yet. I need the old Blade Runner. I need your magic.
It was quit when I come in here, Brian. I'm twice as quit now.
The film was not a huge success at first. Over the period of time, it has developed a very loyal audience, and its influence on other filmmakers is enormous, so it has a very important place in film history.
It's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does?
World building is something that Ridley Scott has always had an undeniable gift for, and on those terms, Blade Runner might well be his Sistine Chapel. The world he created was so immersive and so detailed that it always begged to be explored further, and now, 30 years later, we're getting to do that. Incidentally, 30 years is the time that has also passed on screen between the two movies, with Scott's nightmarish LA of 2019 being replaced with an even more nightmarish and brutal LA of 2049. Ridley Scott's original film created a futuristic Earth, the likes of which we had never seen before. So, how did the production team go about imagining a world 30 years later?
Stay back.
Of course, you go back and study the movie once we accepted the daunting job of a remake of this movie, because it's a huge responsibility for all of us. And I think we all feel that way because we love the movie and we want to make sure that we do it justice, Because we had something to work with, which was the original movie and the vernacular of that movie, it helped as a launching place for us. But we're still in the future of that movie. So we did have to kind of reevaluate what we were going to keep from the old and what we were going to sort of grow out of that.
Fire. Fire. Go north. Fire.
The production design on that original film is the stuff of legend, what was achieved on that back lot in Los Angeles. How have techniques changed in terms of the way you approach world building on that scale for this sequel?
Well, it's interesting because we're approaching it really the same way they did the first film in a lot of ways.
You want to go for a ride?
Of course, there weren't computers back then, and there was a big thing to kind of do the extensions or the bigger shots because they were quite contained back then. So we're trying to focus the same way, building real sets, shooting as much in camera as we can, and giving the reality. When I asked Denis and Roger Deakins, our DP, we were talking, he said, let's make it real. Let's make it real. The audience, that's what the audience wants to see. We want to see it that way. And the extensions of reality into the computer world become much clearer and more, I think, more specific. And so that's we've approached it through all of the techniques we've had. We're using miniatures. We're using, obviously, visual effects is a big part of it for the flying aspect and so on. But it's old school techniques with all the modern touches.
This film is obviously set 30 years after the LA we saw in 2019. We're now in 2049. What is that world like?
Well, when we were looking, is it that, is it that? And one night I received an email from Denis, and he said, the world is brutal. And that was it. And I think that's what it is. The first one, it was humid and damp and not pretty, and it was very dark. It's even worse. Now it's cold. Now it's miserable, and we have that. It's not just that, but it's part of the world, and it's brutal.
I think I found him.
That's not possible. If this gets out, we've bought ourselves a war.
The man with the huge responsibility of ushering Blade Runner 2049 to the big screen is the visionary director, Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve, how much of his work did you know before this film?
Well, I'd seen every film that he'd made to that point. I admired his work. I thought he was a real director. I especially appreciated how he worked with actors. I'd heard his reputation. I was looking forward to working with him. I covered my tracks, scrambled the records, we were being hunted.
Harrison was on board before me. For obvious reasons, it would not have been possible to make this movie without Harrison. So they went first to ask him, will you agree if we were trying to make a sequel to the first one? And he was very excited by the idea. The thing is that when I came on board, I had to be like stamp approved by Harrison. So I met him and then we had a first nice meeting. And I must say that for me it was quite an experience because that's a thing that I don't think I told him, but still he was my childhood hero, you know. So it's always strange to meet the heroes of your childhood, you know. It's like always like I'm not someone that is very starstruck in my life, but Harrison had to cross a bridge to be able to start to behave normally in front of him.
What are you doing here?
I heard the piano.
Don't lie. It's rude.
I felt that Ridley Scott and Hampton Fancher came with another strong story, another strong and powerful and poetic story that is taking place in the same universe. And that's why I agreed to get on board and honor the invitation that was made to me.
You're a cop.
I'm not here to take you in.
Oh, yeah? Then what?
I just have some questions.
The pressure was very high at the beginning before I agreed to do it, and once I agreed to do it, the weeks and the month that went after, I had to deal with that pressure. But once I accept the idea that our chance of failure were huge, because you will always, no matter as good the movie is, you will always be compared to the first one. For the better and the worst, I made peace with this idea. And once I made peace, I became totally free. Ryan Gosling and I were saying to ourselves, let's use that freedom and have fun with it, you know, and it was a privilege to work on this universe. And I'm very proud of the movie we made.
He's got every gun in the city. I've got you.
That's it for part one, but stay tuned as I chat to Ryan Gosling about being on the set of one of the most anticipated films of the year.
The key to the future is finally unearthed.
There is an order to things. That's what we do here. We keep order.
Welcome back. Now, while I was on the set of Blade Runner 2049 in Budapest, I was lucky enough to catch up with its star, Ryan Gosling.
I missed you, baby sweet. It was a day.
It was a day.
This is kind of a sentence that I never thought I'd be able to say. It is great to be here behind the scenes on a sequel to Blade Runner. Has that statement sunk in for you yet?
No, it's still pretty exciting.
Because you're about 3 months into filming. Do you have those pinch yourself moments when you're sort of walking around some of these incredible sets?
Yeah, the level of detail and craftsmanship that's gone into every aspect of this film is so impressive and it never gets old, you know. It's also constantly revealing itself because every time we come to a new set, it's just, most of the sets are practical and there's very little green screen, so it's really special.
Plan on taking me in. Take a look inside.
Mr. Morton, if taking you in is an option, I would much prefer that to the alternative. I'm sure you knew it would be someone in time. I'm sorry it had to be me.
We're talking about a sequel to a movie, the original, that sort of took on a life of its own outside its running time to become the stuff of cinematic legend. What is your relationship with that film? I guess in terms of when you first saw it and the effect it had on you.
It's funny, I don't remember the first time I saw Blade Runner. I think I saw everything that ripped it off first. And then, of course, when I saw it, I realized that it was the origin of all these things I had grown up on. It's such an influential film, and that you can understand why when you see it. It's a very, very powerful film.
What do you want?
I want to ask you some questions.
In terms of then taking a role in the sequel, it's not quite as easy a decision as it might sound. Were there certain things that you wanted to know were in place before you joined a sequel to Blade Runner?
Well, you know, I think Harrison's involvement was key. First of all, it having his blessing, but not only that, but his presence and his influence. And then also Ridley as well, and then of course meeting with Denis, hearing his vision for it. It very quickly became something I knew I'd be very, very lucky to be a part of.
They know you're here.
I came alone.
I think most of us, because the world that Ridley Scott created with the original was such an immersive universe, that we'd have been happy with a sequel just set in that world. So I guess the icing on the sci-fi film noir cake is the fact that Harrison Ford is returning as Rick Deckard. What's it like, not just sharing a scene with Harrison Ford, but sharing a scene with Harrison Ford in that role?
We shot for a few months before Harrison showed up. I'd found a really great partnership with Denis and with Roger Deakins and all of the actors. But, you know, of course, we were always wondering how it would be when Harrison arrived. And it just was a relief when he got here because we just immediately started working. You know, he just cares very deeply about his work and he cares very deeply about the scene and all the details in the scene. And so it really was like he'd been here all along. We just got to work right away and it's been a wonderful experience working with him.
I had your job once. I was good at it.
Things were simpler then.
I got to sit down with with Ryan Gosling in Budapest, and he basically said that without your involvement in this project, he wouldn't have wanted to do it. He wouldn't have wanted to be part of a sequel that you weren't involved with. How does that make you feel?
The truth is that I really enjoyed working with him. The relationship between the characters that we play is a very important part of the story, and it was great to have an actor to work with that I so much admire and that works so diligently and so intelligently on what he brings to the screen.
Did you ever imagine you'd be sitting here talking about a sequel to Blade Runner?
I didn't really even think about thinking about it till the day that Ridley called and said, in theory, would you be interested in reprising the character? And I said, yes, in theory I would, if there was a script that I loved and a director whose work I admired. And he said, well, I'm going to direct. And I said, okay. And when Ridley chose not to do it, and Denis was brought in, I thought that was a very good idea. Met with him, enjoyed meeting with him, enjoyed his ideas, so it seemed like a reasonable thing to do.
Tell me what you remember. Everything.
It's been 35 years since you played the character.
Mm-hmm.
Did you rewatch the original to familiarize yourself again with the character?
I watched probably 5 versions of the original, not to familiarize myself with the character, but to fill in the blanks. I knew what the character was. I didn't have any problem remembering the character, but I wanted to refresh my memory on other aspects of the story. What's the plan?
We don't run.
And that is our time on the set of Blade Runner 2049 at an end. But by the sounds of things, this film is only the beginning in a whole new era for the Blade Runner universe on the big screen. And I, for one, find that one of the most exciting things happening in cinema today. From here in Budapest, bye-bye.
I always told you, you're special. Your story isn't over yet. There's still a page left.